You are listening to the Mark Guzman Podcast Experience. It's not a secret that we live in polarizing times. That can make voicing opinions and telling stories difficult at times. My guest today, though, uses the power of theater to highlight and bring awareness to the struggles that African Americans in our country deal with daily. To say that she is an accomplished woman would be an understatement. She is a modern-day Bay Area Renaissance woman who has been a director, writer, actress, poet, lyricist, producer, and much, much more, as well as serving as a true leader and figurehead in her community. So please welcome to the podcast, Dr. Ayodele Nzinga. I want to thank you for being on the podcast. I'm excited for this episode, and let's get started. Where did you grow up?
In California, mostly in the Bay Area. I've been in the East Bay for over 40 years.
What city did you grow up in, or was it just various cities?
Various cities. My young childhood, when I originally came to California, I lived in Berkeley. I went from my grandmother's house in Berkeley to my mother's house in Vallejo. I came of age in Oakland. I've lived all over Oakland.
That's awesome. And then where did you go to school?
Elementary school in the East Bay here in Berkeley and in Vallejo. High school, as far as I went in high school, in Vallejo. There's a story about me in school. I actually don't have a high school diploma, although I'm a double doc. I have an MFA and a PhD. I went to New College of California and the California Institute of Integral Studies, built in San Francisco.
Wow, so you spent a lot of years in education, though, to have your 2 PhDs.
Yeah, and considering, I don't know if I'm a dropout, I'm more of a walkout in terms of high school. Yeah, I actually like learning. I didn't find secondary education or public education a very friendly or welcoming place, but I'm very curious. I enjoy learning. I like attempting to know as much as we can know anything.
What made you decide to pursue your 2 doctorates?
Well, I guess it started with after sort of walking out of high school, I kind of knew I wasn't finished. And I knew that I didn't know how to support myself, or at least I hadn't connected to the way that I was supposed to support myself. So I went back into school, and nobody told me how to matriculate. So I wandered around in the junior college system for a really long time because I didn't know how to get out of school. I finally figured out on my own that you're supposed to graduate and that there should be some trajectory. And I entered a new college program that had an accelerated path to your BA. And something just bit me. I really enjoyed learning. And I still hadn't quite grasped the idea of the fact that my passion could feed me. So I was still looking for some way to be an adult. And so I took classes and majored in political critique and social critique. And then it just wasn't finished. I've always been a writer. One of the reasons I didn't know that is because, like I said, public school is a very friendly place. And so I pursued the MFA. And I pursued the doctorate in Transformative Education and Change because I don't know what you do with an MFA unless you teach writing. And at the time, there wasn't a doctorate in theater. There is now a doctorate in dramaturgy, in theater, psychodrama, and other interesting things. Those degrees didn't exist just a few years ago. So it's worked out rather well. I am a writer. My craft is word-based. I'm essentially a storyteller. And transformative education and change. The purpose for being a storyteller, in my estimation, is to affect change and to affect transformation. And so I look at theater as a way to educate people, a way to connect people to not only the imaginal, but also to reality and to their own possibility of affecting change in the world.
Okay, and maybe you can explain a little bit more what exactly is transformative education?
Education that makes you different. You know, it is rather literal in this particular case, as words often are. Transformative, to take you from a nascent state, a cocoon, to a full butterfly. Transformative to, in the case of North American Africans, which are the demographic that I do my work in, to transform trauma into victory, to transform narratives of inability into narratives of thriving. To in the faith that I follow, we have a term. It's called the Iwapele. To go from the life you have to the life you want. Transformation, movement, change. And so a transformative education is then one that acts in the way that the definition of education it says it should. Education is to lead you out, to bring out the light in you, not necessarily to make you into a mole. That's why I had a problem with public school. We're actually all quite different. And I think from a very young age, it's possible to know what it is you want to do in life. So a proper education then should enable you to do those things. So a transformative education then is an education that leads you out towards the things that you want to do and enables a change in you, your community, the world around you.
I like that explanation. And now you've mentioned several times that the public education failed when you were going through that system. Do you still feel public education is pretty much the same today?
I think it's underlined by dropout rates, even though they've improved slowly, and maybe over the last 3-year period. Different places like Oakland, where I'm talking from, the state of California, where I'm talking from, can say that they've improved slightly in the last 3 to 5 years. But to come from such a abysmal place, that's not really saying much. Statistics say that most North American African males actually check out of school at around 12 years old, even if their bodies still stay there. The massive amount of literature and reality that gives truth to the school to prison pipeline. I have a difficulty teaching in places where I'm bound by curriculum that does not support the lived realities of the students sitting in the room. I also observed that there are massive behavior problems in public institutions. And that's normally because children are not engaged. I run a free summer camp. I've done it for 10 years. And we have kids as early as we say we take kids from 5 to 18. In reality, we often work with kids as young as 3. And we layer in college undergraduates. So we're really working with a population of between, say, maybe 3 and 30. And we create an even playing ground here that's amazingly disciplined. So I know that discipline in marginalized spaces is possible. I think that the expectation is not there. And there's an immense amount of systemic thought that still undergirds public classrooms. There are some remarkable things being done. There are a lot of interesting spaces where they're trying to do non-traditional things. I think a lot of amazing learning actually happens in after-school programs. And I think it's incumbent on communities to make sure that there are a plethora of out-of-school learning activities.
Totally agree on that one. And it's really sad to see a lot of different school districts having to cut back that program based on funding or mismanaged funds and other various issues. Um, yeah, I mean, after school activities, I mean, it's definitely a big deal. I mean, it gives the students an opportunity to really get out of the school learning environment and learn more about what they're passionate about and how to, provide, for themselves to society and, and everyone's got different passions. So it's really sad to see, from sports to theaters and various other activities just being constantly cut.
Yeah. We are not all cut out to be good cogs, and some of the solutions to what we figure are endemic problems perhaps lie in people um, remaining in firm touch with their imagination. And I also firmly believe that there is a purpose for each of us. Um, when I speak of it poetically, I say that God whispered something in everybody's ear right before you take your first breath. Your duty to yourself, to your family, to your community is to remember what that is and then go and do that to the best of your ability. So I think that that's to a great extent what public education is missing is the opportunity to make people the best them that they can be. And we minimalize the value of some things. We like to count things in money. So when we minimalize the value of arts and entertainment and literature, it doesn't track well when you look at the numbers that those things contribute to the gross national product of metropolitan areas. Art, art is amongst the top three earning categories in the state of California. So it does translate into being able to make a living, but we undervalue it. And I think that the tragedy in that is it's not just that it will and can track economically, is that art is the place where we learn empathy. It's the place where we learn compassion. It's the place where we learn to be human. It's the place where you learn by practice, collaboration. And tell me what other class in a public schoolroom those essential skills for being human are taught.
Yeah. Now, your passion for writing, when did you realize that? And I know you said you've been writing since a very young age. Do you remember when you really discovered that was your passion?
Mm, Writing and reading is odd to me. I know that somebody taught me to read and write at some point in time. I honestly do not remember the process of learning to read and write. It seems like I could always do it. I kept journals from very, very young ages. I always wrote verse. I've always wrote short stories. I wrote my first full-length play that I actually produced as a senior in high school, and noted for the fact that at that point in time in high school, I had gotten kicked out of the high school in the black part of town, and I was going to the high school in the white part of town. And I established the first Black History Month celebration, and we produced this play. And so, and I got there's a band called Confunction. Um, Lewis McCall was a trumpet player. Felton Pilot was the lead vocalist. I put Lewis McCall and Felton Pilot on stage for the first time in that production. Um, so I've always known I could do it, but it seemed like a parlor trick for a long time, and it didn't necessarily seem to track and have any value in the real world. So I can't really tell you. And then there's the thing about learning to speak English. Um, and English is supposedly my native tongue, but I'm an Ebonics speaker. That's actually my native tongue. And I managed to get all the way to 12th grade and not be able to write in discernible English. And so there was a period of time where I was very attracted to the written word. And I'm a spoken word artist. So there was never any doubt there was value in the words. But I had a very difficult time in my master's in writing class because I literally did not write in English. And by that time, I was in a master's program. And so somewhere around, I guess, the publishing of performing literacy, um, that's like a scholarly book. And at the time things began to be published, I think there was still some doubt in my head about. I thought they were all flukes until they piled up to the point where it's not a fluke. It's what I do, and my discipline is theater. But the crux of theater is storytelling, and the crux of that is the spoken and written word. So it's a part of my DNA. Like I said, I honestly don't remember learning to read and write.
So the spoken word, is that the biggest attraction to theater for you?
Hmm. I think that having an understanding of theater and an understanding of the craft of acting makes one a better spoken word artist. I think too that there's some caveat there. There are people who can ride a beat really well. They're very rhythmic, but when you take apart what's actually being said, I pay attention to words. And so you take apart what's actually being said, then I have difficulty. I'm the kind of person when I hear a song, I like the beat, but I want to know what the lyrics are. The
Mm-hmm.
lyrics have to, for it to mean something to me. So good spoken word for me is a combination of really good lyrics, clever lyricism, and then on point delivery. So it is sort of, and I think it's what makes me, my understanding of theater is what makes me a good spoken word artist. I think that being a good spoken word artist should translate it to being a good stage performer. It doesn't always work that way. I see that in my practice, that people that are really good spitters have the ability to be in the emotion of that piece, but have difficulty playing a full range of emotions. And on a stage, even if you're the worst villain, there's some tender part to you. There's some redeeming grace that makes us care about you being a villain. And the same is true for the ingenue or the leading man or the leading lady. It's not interesting if there isn't some flaw, if we can't see the motivation behind it. So the kind of theater I like to do and the kind of performances I like to evoke in the people who perform for me, I want them to perform being human.
So let's talk about the lower bottom players. Where did the name come from and when did you establish it?
We are sitting in the lower bottoms as I speak to you right now. It's an area in West Oakland that's near the 880 on ramp, close to the Port of Oakland. It's the last freeway exit before San Francisco. And the lower bottoms is a colloquial that this area has been called by for a long time. It's also called the Prescott area, but mostly only the city calls it Prescott, and newcomers call it Prescott. So the lower bottoms existed as a gypsy troupe without that name, probably since the latter part of 1998. And in 1999, we really began to purposely do things as a group. It wasn't a formal season, but we had developed sort of a demographic route. We were sort of noted for doing performances in non-traditional performance spaces. We would take things into the jail, we'd take things in the juvenile hall, we'd do them in churches and shelters, on the sidewalk in front of the soup line. And I came to meet a woman about a woman's program at a place called the Prescott Joseph Center in West Oakland. And the woman was actually an artist. And we never talked about the business I came to conduct. She showed me around this really sort of fantastic old Oakland mansion. It was actually two houses fused together, and it was a community center. And she introduced me to the director of the community center, Dr. Washington Burns, who became my angel for like the next 13 years. He built me a theater in the backyard of Prescott Joseph with a regulation proscenium stage. And for 13 years, we were known as the Oakland's hidden jewel in West Oakland in the lower bottom. The troupe was named for the area. We took that name in 2000 and sort of began anew in 2000. After we left Prescott, we sort of remade our own history and subsumed our history prior to Prescott. But it was Dr. Burns who built the Cynthia Bowman Memorial Theater for us, and we were the troupe in residence until that theater went dark midway through the August Wilson Century Cycle in 2013. And we thought really long and hard about what a good run we had had to that point. Most community theaters come together and then disband within a couple of years. For us to have lasted that long, 15 years if you counted all our history, 13 years in one house, was rather remarkable. But we were only halfway through the August Wilson Century Cycle, and we had made a commitment. I have a habit of doing what I say I'm going to do. So rather than disband, we became the only troupe that's ever done a full-length theater production in the African American Museum in Oakland. We staged Fences there. And then we understood that there was a performance space that was envisioned to be a shared performance space called the Flight Deck, opening downtown Oakland on Broadway. You know what Broadway sounds like to theater makers. And so we went, we inquired, and we've been in residence on Broadway at the Flight Deck ever since.
That's amazing. And what kind of plays does the troupe usually do?
We do theater that makes you taller. We do theater with a very, very, very black lens. But it's designed to hit the universal in all of us. We are the only troupe in the world that's ever done the entire August Wilson Century Cycle. So if you're familiar with August Wilson's work, and understand we spent 5 years on that Century Cycle doing 2 of those plays, main stage each year, that gives you a great deal of understanding about the type of work we do. We take situations that are not normally considered main stage fare, and we make really excellent theater out of it. Our demographics include people who just like good theater. We have a huge black following. We cultivate people who've never been to the theater because we figure they're all theater junkies. They just don't know it yet. I work a lot with at-risk populations. I am very dedicated to explaining to people and helping people experience the fact that transformation is possible. And it begins with understanding that no matter how many times you've been thrown away, no matter how many times somebody told you that you can't do something, that you too are an author and you can write your own story and it gets to end the way that you want it. And so I picked up quite a few actors that way that have stayed with me for a number of years and are fantastic examples of transformation, of seizing the time and doing what we call praying with your hands moving, so that you actually build the road that you walk on. You might be standing in one place and trying to get to the next place and literally be called upon to build that road. We do work that talks about things like that, things that help us see where we're joined, things that invite conversations people don't like to have. We talk about race. We talk about classism. We talk about gentrification. We talk about being interdependent on each other. We talked about AIDS. We talked about homosexuality. We talked about intergroup violence. So we tackle subjects that are considered taboo. We do everything from a black lens. For about 10 years, everything I did, for about 10 years, everything I did was site-specific to Oakland, California, even more site-specific to West Oakland, California. Wilson was the first time that I actually tumbled onto a piece of work that carried such a large universal story in it until it became important that I not adapt it, that I not change its site, because the fact that it could so clearly mirror our lives here on the West Coast, when it was about a site-specific place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, made a bigger point. And it sort of goes to the point of why my practice is in West Oakland. Almost everything I do is intentional, and as far as I can control intentionality. I picked West Oakland because it was close, because I love Oakland, because there were a big group of people who looked like me, because it had a long story of struggle and resilience that I could trace, and because it reminded me of every other marginalized and oppressed place on the face of the earth that I knew about. And so there is a big line that draws through marginalized spaces. There's also a big line that draws through everybody. And I think that I try to tease those two lines together. And I like to have conversations about what comes out of those lines being vibrated against each other.
Now, currently, the Lower Bottom Players is doing a production called Lifer. And
Yes.
this is a story about Glenn Bailey. Now, who is Glenn Bailey, and why are you telling his story?
Glenn Bailey is a man who did 52 years inside the California correctional system. He did 42 years in one stretch for being convicted of a double homicide that he committed, has always admitted that he committed. He is a marvelous first-hand account of the California correctional system, having been incarcerated for 52 years, and it was almost in a straight stretch. He his last time he went to jail before this 42-year stretch was in December of 1969, and he committed the murders in 1972. So basically for 52 years he was incarcerated with very small breaks. So he was in the system when Jonathan Jackson got arrested, George Jackson, when Frida Drungo was in jail. He did time with Dr. Ron Karanga. All of the political prisoners you can think about that came through the California system. He knew them personally and did time with them. He was in jail when 3 strikes and the war on drugs filled the prison systems with young black men, and the culture inside jail changed. He was inside jail during Prop 40, when Prop 40 came into effect. He was in prison when Governor Wilson took away everybody's parole dates, and California was a no parole state up until 2008. He was in jail when the prison system became privatized, and that's an immense amount of first-hand knowledge. It's extremely interesting to me because my own personal opinion about the carceral system is that it's an extension of chattel slavery. So to talk to a subject that I find so engaging, who has absolutely no animosity towards the California correctional system, the district attorney who prosecuted him, the wardens in the institutions in which he served time, none of those people. I've had barbecues for him in my front yard where I've entertained him, the district attorney who prosecuted him, the policeman who arrested him, who later went to prison himself and then served time with Bailey too, and the man Owens, who was mistakenly arrested with Owens and did over 10 years for that double homicide. He wasn't with Bailey. Bailey told him that from the very beginning, but it took the DA, same guy sitting in my yard, 10 years to figure out he had the wrong man. And they all sit down and break bread together. I find that amazing.
Wow.
And so when John Pomeroy, who is the connection here, John Pomeroy came to see another piece of work, another original piece of work of mine called Beyond the Bars Growing Home. This entire season, 18 Catch a Fire for us, has been about examining the carceral system to see how it affects communities and families and individuals. And what does it mean? Let's talk about it. And so Pomeroy came and saw that play. And after it was over, I was decompressing in a space outside, and he came outside and was crying. And he told me about Glenn Bailey and asked me if I would be interested in writing a book about it. I accepted. Long story short, I'm a theater maker. Writing a book is a much longer endeavor. So I'm in mid-process in writing the book, his life story, A Lifer at Large. But I've got this theater season, and I'm examining incarceration. So I ripped the play out of it called Lifer, and that's what's on stage now.
Okay. Now, I know the Bay Area has had a long history of progressive movements, and I know a lot of this history also influences a lot of the plays that the lower bottom players do. And so, what are some of the past productions where you've taken progressive movements and used it to convey your message?
I think this season is an example of that. There's a large connection to prison movements centered in the East Bay because of the Black Panther Party, because of the number of people who went to jail from here or for what are called political crimes. There's a great interest in connecting the dots and in having one conversation. Black Lives Matters, when it talks about Black Lives Mattering, again, all of our work is from a Black lens because we understand that Black life does matter. And August Wilson, our experience with him taught us that our stories are enough. Our stories are enough for us to understand everything about being human. And there's something very humanizing about hitching your star to those stories, bringing those stories to main stage, digging a niche and saying, that's all I do. I'm not doing anything else. And then being able to hang out for 20 years and do it. We're going into our 19th season. That means that for 20 years, we've been making theater in that iteration. I used to say we were having an intergroup conversation. We just didn't care who else listened. I don't think that that's changed much, but I am perhaps a little bit more invested in who is listening and wanting. We're at a strange time in history. An interesting thing happened last January. I have another colleague who's an art maker who has a piece up now called the Trumpocalypse. And I think that's the way a lot of people took the election last January. So it's been a lot of dissent voicing and a lot of fermenting of displeasure. The thing for me is that most of the issues that are being raised are not new issues. Those issues didn't spring to life in January. All of those issues had lives way before January. And so I think that we don't so much ride movements as we've always been in the same conversation. And even though during the previous presidency, we were in what was declared a so-called post-race era, I never got that memo. So I'm very much still engaged in having the same conversation I was trying to have in 1998. And so I don't know that so much that any current movement makes me create a piece of theater as I would actually say that my theater supports thought about these movements that come and go. And they're all parts of this consistent conversation that I'm trying to have.
Mm-hmm. And what's your take on the message like sports athletes like Colin Kaepernick, taking a knee during the anthem? I know there's a lot of support and there's also a lot of backlash on it. What's your personal take on that?
Well, I've never known what to say, so I always say what I think. Okay. One, I find it interesting. He's not the first athlete to protest, and I think of the brothers during the Olympics who went barefoot with the Black Fist salute, who paid a similar price to what Kaepernick is now paying. So I like to always preface a conversation about Kaepernick with he wasn't the first person to do this. Oddly, there are even players currently, contemporary players, who never stood for the anthem, and they never really received any attention. Some of those joined Kaepernick when the furor around him rose. I think that it was a brave thing for him to do. I wonder if he knew how much it would cost him when he did it. I think he is being blackballed. I think that everybody has the right to have an opinion. I don't think that you get to say he doesn't get to have an opinion because he's an athlete. That would be like telling me I don't have an opinion about reality because I'm a theater maker, or you don't have a right to an opinion because, you're a businessman and a podcast director. Everybody's got an opinion. It's the public's job to be discerning about how much someone's opinion is actually worth. The fear that grew up around his taking a stand by not taking a stand is much more interesting to me, actually, than what Kaepernick did. All this backlash about can you make athletes do this or that, or they ought to be grateful because they're getting paid so much. See, all of that was very, very telling, and none of it sounded right to me. And so all of that makes his stance even more valid. So he's got a right to an opinion. We all do.
Yeah, exactly. Now, there was also a project called Beyond Bars.
Yeah, there is.
What was that
I just,
project, and what did you learn from that experience?
Beyond the Bars. Okay, wait. I may have got your question wrong because I did a play called Beyond the Bars Growing Home, but there is also out in the world, in a different place, a project called Beyond the Bars. So, to which were you referring?
Well, why don't we talk about your production, Beyond the Bars?
Beyond the Bars is informed by firsthand interviews with a number of what are now being called returning citizens, people who have been incarcerated for a number of years. I also interviewed the children of parents who have been incarcerated, the loved ones, people who had brothers who had done long stints in jail, and considered what does that cost the community? What is a family is a unit inside of a community. So when you get someplace like West Oakland, where the war on drugs played havoc, and lots and lots and lots of black men went to jail for extended periods of time, what does that do to that community? And then what happens to those people's sense of home? It's an interesting question in Bailey's case. Bailey's very connected to West Oakland, but how do you not be connected inside the carceral system for 52 years to being institutionalized? So what is the locus of home for someone who's incarcerated? And then when you're not in jail anymore and you come back, I interviewed brothers who were waiting for jobs from Alameda County. Alameda County had promised that it was going to employ ex-offenders. And after about a 2-year period, they had employed 3 men. So wondering, how do you get back into the fabric of society, the fabric of your own life, once you've transgressed or been accused of transgressing, then how do you put it back together? And so the vehicle for me telling those stories was I created a support group wherein these men met over and over again, and they discussed these various issues. Meanwhile, a young man is assigned to come to the group as opposed to going to jail. and he is actively hunting the man who's killed his brother. The men in the group discover what's going on, and then here's where theater projects what it needs to happen in the world. The men in the group talk to him and move him from wanting to kill the man who killed his brother to wanting to live so that his mother has at least one living son, and so that there is someone alive to honor his brother and take forward his brother's name, to put aside the need and the pressure from the street and from the trauma, that the only solution is to kill the killer. And so that was the piece of theater that came out of that. That's the piece of theater that Mr. Pomeroy saw and decided I was the right one to tell the Glenn Bailey story.
Now, I know there's a lot of talk about the various issues with the prison system, and especially when it comes to a privatized system and it becomes just basically a giant profit center for private corporations, and they're just making money off of incarcerating people. And I wanted to get your opinion on what needs to happen with prison reform, because there's a high number of minorities that are in prison in the current system, many for extremely very small items. And one of the problems that's highlighted too is how many people don't have the financial resources to defend themselves, and then they're stuck in jail and prison for months before they even have a trial date, and the whole system just seems completely rigged against them sometimes. So I wanted to get your opinion on it and what needs to happen in order to reform the prison system.
You hit a lot of really important things. The system is broken, and it's broken at its entry point. The turnstile is broken. There are very few cases that actually go to trial. We do justice here with let's make a deal. Let's make a deal, put innocent people in jail because they pick up points, stripes, jackets, that then one transgression is you got this long history of barely escaping. It's very much a money situation. We call the lawyers appointed by the court, we call them public pretenders. Good legal representation. And in a society that has numerous laws, we want to control everything by regulation. We criminalize activities that are the result of social problems that we won't solve. An example is homelessness and can't lie, sleep, or sit laws, things of that nature. We actually need to spend some time in solving social problems. There are people who steal because they're bad and they don't get no home training, okay? And the people who steal because they're hungry. The people who steal because they can't get a job. The people who sell dope because the dope man is hiring and nobody else is. People cheat on their taxes because we're in a gig economy and people are working more hours than a person should stay awake, and they're still drowning in debt. There are social structures that are invitations to criminality when we surround them with the number of regulations that we have. Meanwhile, we write off huge social problems like homelessness, childhood hunger, and we don't think that that's going to have any result. The natural instinct of human beings is to stay alive. People just don't sit somewhere piously because they're poor and die. That's just not how it works. And so if we would quit making all of these mindless regulations that are designed to ensnare people, we have a whole set of what I call baby laws. They're laws that are strictly for poor people or minorities, and they don't have any traction inside dominant society, none whatsoever. And so we need to stop it at the turnstile. And then once people actually get into prison, There's a funny thing that almost nothing bad doesn't have some opportunity in it somewhere. One thing prison affords people is a great deal of time to think. It affords, especially most poor, marginalized people who find class a barrier to going forward in society. It gives them something they have never had. It's almost like being able to go to graduate school. You have this immense amount of time to yourself to think. And so they ought to be given something to think with. I found out from those interviews I did from behind the bars, and in especially in talking to the population that surrounds Bailey, that most rehabilitation programs inside of prison are prisoner initiated, and that often these prisoners have to fight very, very hard for just the rudimentary uh, essentials to run these programs. These programs are so successful, and so they often spin out into outside programs, things like the Squires out of San Quentin. That's a prisoner initiated program. They often come out and establish houses to help prisoners transition. Watching Mr. Bailey come out, there's absolutely no net for that man, no net for him at all. And he's representative of a demographic that I just became aware of, and it's a growing demographic, and it's still invisible. The number of men who got things like 25 to life and actually survived the 25 years and came out. I know literally at least 75 to 100 people who are over 70 years old who spent over 30, 40 years in jail. What are their prospects once they're back out here? Recidivism is ridiculous. Almost every major agency inside the United States government has a budget to attend to recidivism. You know what the recidivism statistics are, so they either don't know what they're doing or they're doing exactly what they intend to do, because most of them are back in jail within 2 years after they release. And when I say most of them, it's about 30% are back in jail within 2 years, and over 50% are back in jail inside 5 years. And that's because there's nothing out here for them to help them pick up and repair, because you do have to repair life. It's been torn, and then go forward.
Yeah, City of Richmond, several years back, initiated a program to where they did an outreach and they contacted people with known that were known gang members, and they basically said, "Hey, look, if you don't commit any crimes, we're going to pay you something like $1,000 or $2,000 per month, but you can't commit any more crimes." And that program worked so well, and it started to drop a lot of crime in the city of Richmond. And the chief at the time was basically explaining to the city and to his colleagues that, we've got a socioeconomic problem, and this is just one small part of the solution, but it kind of drives to the point that much crime is committed because people have to eat. People, you know if no one's hiring, they need to figure out a way to get money to then purchase groceries, right? So that was a very interesting program. He left, and now crime's on the rise again in the city of Richmond. And then to see all the taxpayer dollars going to various programs that are not working, and then you have other countries like Portugal, where they've decriminalized all drugs, and instead what they're doing is, if you're caught or if you're caught with so much drugs and it's illegal, instead of incarcerating you, they start putting you through various programs to help you find a job, help you, you know, make your way back into society. And they're having really great results with the program. And it just seems like we need to, here in the United States, explore those various other options as opposed to just continuing with the status quo. And there's a various YouTube channels that you can watch sentencing live on YouTube of just the prison system. And I mean, it's like a machine. People are just going up, and the judge is just, reviewing their case, and they're making a judgment within 30 seconds and telling them, hey, we're going to fine you $500 or $1,000, and here's your bail amount. And if you can't afford it, well, then you're going to be stuck here for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month until trial. And I mean, it's unfortunate to see so many people that don't have the financial resources. And, it's pretty disheartening to see.
And the recent vote to change the appeal system in the state of California, that's one extreme. And then you have the call to bring back debtors prison, another extreme. And then you have on the other end things like the Innocence Project. You can follow them on Twitter or daily. There's some being released after spending years in prison for something that they did not do. And these commuted sentences are often exactly that. They're not exonerations. They are commuted sentences. The difference between an exoneration and a commuted sentence is having to then monetize someone's time for all that time you stole. A commuted sentence, you give someone a few $1,000s and you send them on their way. If you actually exonerate someone and then they file a case for false arrest, that's much more expensive. We talked about transformation before. Transformation, and we're talking about change here, change and transformation. How do we transform the prison system? How do we change the system that we live in? Change and transformation begin with intentionality. So you have to stop and think about, so what is the intention then of taxing people legally in a court of law for things they can't possibly pay that will then end up in them being incarcerated in a system where we have privatized prisons, and certain states have mandatory minimums. We must keep these many bodies incarcerated in order for us to make our bottom line. There's something terribly wrong with that. And these are things, it's not difficult to know. These are conversations we don't like to have. And one of the reasons I like to have the conversations is because once you can go, okay, A, B, C, hey, we're doing the alphabet here. We're going to end on Z. Once you can clearly see it, then I think you have an obligation to do something about it. And if you don't do anything about it, once you can clearly see it, then you're complicit.
It's deep. Well, that's our time for the podcast, and we'll end it there. I mean, we could keep going on and on about this, and I want to thank you for being on the podcast. What's the best way for people to learn more about your troupe and the productions?
Okay, you can email me at wordslanger, WORDSLANGER @gmail.com. You can look up the troupe online, www.lowerbottomplayaz, playaz is spelled PLAYAZ.com.
Great. And we'll get all that linked up in the show description. And so I want to thank you again for being on the podcast. This was a great, great episode. A lot to talk about, a lot to take in. And I'm sure we'll be doing this again sometime in the future.
Okay. Very, very happy to talk to you. Do me a favor. Please send me a link to the podcast and let me know when it will be airing so I can share it.
Will do. Yeah, perfect.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Lovely afternoon.
You too. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Thank you to our producer, Sam Lemon. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share the podcast. Remember, you can listen to the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, iHeartRadio, Google Play, SoundCloud, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. For more information on my business as a property manager and real estate team, go visit my website at markguzman.com. I really want to thank all of you for listening. It means the world to me, and I hope today's episode provides you value in your day-to-day life. I created this podcast to help showcase the many great people that live in this world and help share some knowledge that I've learned along the way in life. Again, thank you for listening. Check out our sponsors, and I'll catch you on the next episode.